Well, I'm going to start this morning with a confession of the nerdy kind. I love strategy city building games like SimCity or Transportation Fever. And what I like about them is you start with just like a people group and a blank map. And then you get to build the city. You get to build the nation. You get to decide what sort of priorities your people will have, what sort of infrastructure will be in place. And then as time progresses, you get to see how the decisions you made at the beginning impact the things that happen later on in life. This is something of what we see in the book of Exodus. The Israelites at this point are a people group that's roughly 700 years old. I mean, you take it back to Abraham when he leaves a land that he knows and goes to the land that he does not know. But even though they've been a people group for 700 years, they have not yet been a self-governing nation. Under Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were just a clan. And then they turn into kind of a large family, and then they move to Egypt, and they multiply, but they're under the Egyptian government. So now in the Exodus, what we find are the Israelites are an ancient people, but a new nation. They've been freed from Egypt, and they're on their way to the Promised Land, but right now they're camped at Mount Sinai, where God is giving them a law. And he says, you will be a people, you will be a nation with me right at the center, which means you must be a holy nation, a holy people. And so he starts where we were last week with the Ten Commandments. And I said that the Ten Commandments are the overview of what is required to be the people of God in the presence of God. The next passage, the one we're going to go through today, is the application of those Ten Commandments into specific situations. Like the sixth commandment, do not kill. Okay, I think we get that. But what do we do if someone does kill? But what if someone gets killed, but it's an accident? What do we do then? And so the chapters before us this morning, there are a whole bunch of what ifs regarding the law. But we have to be careful as we read them. I said I like sim games, like city building games. But a few years ago, what I realized is that while playing the games is okay, and the older you get, the more kids you have, you get a real job, you realize, okay, the less I actually have time to play these games. But what I found about myself is that more than playing the games, I like watching other people play the games. People who, I said this was a nerdy confession, people who know the mechanics of how the game works, not just how to finish it, but they say things like, well, here's why the developers put in this way, right? Here, they designed this function of the game this way. I've set it up this way because here's how we do this now, and it impacts everything down the line. And that's what I want to do for us in the book of Exodus. Before we get into the actual laws and what this means and applications of the laws, I want us to see what the developer did when he put them in place. Here's why he put these laws in place and the mechanics of it, so that when we see specific instances of it, we understand how it works. Because God did not want the Israelites then, or us today, to simply hear these rules or read these rules and say, okay, bottom line, tell me what to do. It's not what God wanted. Because if you approach the Old Testament law that way, like, okay, bottom line, just tell me what to do, you end up either being a legalist or a skeptic. And in the eyes of God, those are equal. So, in all these laws, all these cases, what's the underlying mechanic at work? Thankfully, the Bible tells us. You jump to the New Testament. Jesus chastises the Pharisees, and what does he tell them? This is Matthew 23:23. He says, you've neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So there's a weight to the law, and those things are justice and mercy. You can technically check off every box of 10 Commandments or the ones that we're going to go through today. You can technically check them all off and still not be right with God because you neglected his justice and obedience. You go against his mercy. That doesn't mean that God's mercy is against the law, but there's a way of doing the law in an ungodly way. It's why the Old Testament prophet Micah says, he has told you, O man, what is good. What does Yahweh require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. So, with that in mind, we're going to go through these laws, and these, one person described them as like case studies. And as we do, what we're going to do is say, okay, what's the underlying mechanic at work? How does this law show God's justice? How does this law explain God's mercy? Because that's what he wants in the carrying out of these laws. Very quickly, you may have seen there's a lot of Bible before us. I'm hoping to cover over 3 chapters. And the reason for that is these laws and applications of laws are grouped together intentionally. And I don't want us to get so bogged down in the, okay, what does it mean not to boil a goat in its mother's milk, right? We can get into that, but I don't want to do so at the expense of losing sight of the bigger picture, which is this. All of this shows us what God is like, specifically his justice and mercy. So if you're thinking, all right, it's already 10:30 and we're going to cover 3 chapters, how long are we going to be here? A while. Not really. I'm not going to go through every single one. We're not going to read every single verse. I'm going to encourage you to do that later. We'll go through some very quickly, and then we'll dig down and go through some a little bit more. And so I've broken this passage down into 7 sections. There's some overlap, but breaking it up into these 7 sections will be helpful. So the first group of laws are those regarding worship. Those regarding worship. We're in Exodus chapter 20. I'm going to start reading in verse 22. So Exodus 20, verse 22, we'll read this together. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make yourself gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and will bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. You shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed on it." Now, I think God starts here. Again, he gives the 10 commandments. And remember, in the giving of the 10 commandments, the people kind of freak out because they're hearing God directly. And they're like, this is too much for us. We don't want this anymore. So Moses, you go up to talk to God and you just relay the message back to us. And so this is the first of the messages that God is giving to Moses to relay to the people. And it starts off with worship. And he does so because worship is the foundation for everything else. If you approach the law and without the idea of giving God glory and worshiping in it, then you miss the whole point. And so these are extensions of the first 3 commandments. Have no other God, don't make any idols, don't profane the name of God, right? Don't speak in God's name in a vain, empty way. In particular, God says, I'm going to make my name be known everywhere. Particularly by me being with you. And as I do, you're going to make sure you don't profane my name. You've heard God saying, right? You've heard me talk directly to you. You don't need idols. Don't make idols of silver or gold. You've heard me speak. Why would you create some sort of idol to speak to you? No. You're getting it direct. And not only that, because of that, then worship is on my terms, not yours. I'm the one who made you. I'm the one who's coming to you. I'm the one speaking to you. You don't get to dictate how that happens. So you're going to be sacrificing to me. When you sacrifice to me, it has to be done in a certain way. And he even gets into, we're not going to get into all of it, but like the altar that the animals are going to be sacrificed on. He says, don't try to make anything yourselves. Either use dirt or stones that are already cut. Why? Because any tool that you have to make an altar would profane it. Now, later on, this is going to change, but I think the idea here is, do you know what altars look like in Egypt? Or you're going to try to invent something from your own mind, and even the tools that you have are not holy enough to be used in my worship. But the baseline setting for all of this is going to dictate everything else that follows, is the law and worship is on God's terms, not theirs. And the same is true for us today. The worship of God is on his terms, not ours. Second section. So the first one regarding worship, the second one regarding slaves. Look at chapter 21, verse 1. Now these are the rules that you shall set before them. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, my children, I will not go free, then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door of the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the men slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. And if he does not do these 3 things for her, she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. Now, this is fascinating for so many reasons. God says, okay, my people, we started off with the baseline of worship, right? Now, here are the rules you need to know. Here's how you're going to function as a nation. Where do we start? When you buy a slave. That's odd. It's weird and probably alarming to our modern ears, and that's okay. One of our jobs, if we want to be faithful Bible readers, is to understand what the Bible says, not what we think it says. And one of the biggest hurdles in doing that is the fact that we come to the Bible with our own experiences and presuppositions that shade the way we read the Bible. And for us as 21st century Americans, and in our history regarding slavery, it is a dark, sinful part of our history, but one that we cannot let shade the way we read the Bible. And so many people, when they hear verse 2, when you buy a slave, they immediately stop reading and think, wait, what? But we have to be careful Bible readers. So a couple things to note here. First, God says, when you buy a Hebrew slave. And so this is Hebrews, talking about Hebrews. It's not talking about other ethnicities or other people. The Bible does talk about that later, but not in today's passage. We'll get there eventually. But this is talking about Israelites. So when you buy an Israelite slave, and then we have to finish the verse. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall work 6 years, and in the 7th year he shall go out for nothing, for free. So we're already seeing a major difference between this sort of slavery and the experience that our country has with slavery. If you buy a slave, he works for you for 6 years, and that's it, and then he goes free. He doesn't have to buy his way out. And so what we find is this is a form of indentured servanthood. Maybe even something similar that you would see in Downton Abbey or something, right? Like, okay, I'm going to sign a contract and I'm going to be with this family, to live with them, to serve with them for a number of years, right? And so I'm going to be a maid, or I'm going to be a valet, or something like that. The reality that God is laying out for them is, as a nation, there will be some people who are wealthy and some people who are poor. And the poor who are unable to get out of the hole that they're in, there's a system in place where they can sign themselves up to pledge themselves to a family to work for 6 years. And during those 6 years, they will have a place to stay, they will have food, and they'll be able to get out of debt. Again, there is the other kind of slavery in the Bible, but that's not what this is talking about. This is the contractual kind between two people where one says, okay, I'm going to sign on with your family. You good with that? And they say, yes, come on, for 6 years. And the purpose of these laws in this section is to ensure that the owner and the slave are treated fairly, that they're both treated justly. So if a slave is single when he comes out, he leaves single. If he's married, he doesn't give up his family to become a slave. He's still a husband, he's still a father, but this is where he's going to be for the next 6 years. Then you get to this situation in verse 4. Here's a scenario. A man is working as a slave, as a servant for 6 years, right? He signed up for that. Let's say he's in year 4 of his service. And the owner comes to him and says, I've just got this brand new servant. Would you like to be married? Right? That's a perfectly fine question. If they do get married as slaves, it doesn't affect the terms of their contract. And so when he gets out in 2 years, she still has 6 years to serve. It doesn't mean that when he gets out, he's abandoning her. It doesn't mean he divorces her. It doesn't mean he leaves her. They're still married, but she's still working as a servant in this house. And if she has a child during that time, the child stays with her, right? But if at the end of that 6 years, the man's like, no, what? I love serving here. I love this man. I want to stay in this family. I'll have my needs met. I'll have a house. I'll have all the food and stuff that I'll need. I'm just working with this family as part of this family. And they can set that up. Another scenario, verse 7, and again, this sounds so odd to our ears, but it is one that would have been readily accepted in pretty much every part of the world throughout history. You and your family become impoverished. You can't get out of the hole. What do? One of their options was to contract their kids out for work. And so for me, for my family, I have a 12-year-old. Okay, Claire, you're 12. You're going to go and work for this family for the next 6 years. You'll be a maid in the house or something like that. It doesn't mean that you never have contact. It doesn't mean you're abandoning their daughter. But if the choice is we are so poor, we can't afford to feed our kids, so we either let her slowly starve or go work with this family for 6 years, that was a choice. They could choose the servitude. And one of the purposes behind this law was when that happened, there were protections in place for the daughter. She wouldn't go out with the men. She wouldn't be exposed to danger. She would be protected there in the house. And if the owner decided, you know what, you've been here for, 2 years, 3 years, this isn't working. You're not what we want. She gets to get out, right? There was an out for them without paying the terms of the contract. And so if he says for 6 years, I'm giving you food, normally you could buy your way out of it. If you came into money suddenly, you could buy your way out of it. But in that scenario, if the owner or the master of the house says, no, we don't want her anymore, she didn't have to buy her way out. She got to go for free. Or if the original contract was, I'm going to be bringing her into the house to be a servant, but I want ultimately for her to be my son's wife, right? That's one of the scenarios it talked about. Then he must treat her and protect her as a daughter. And then if the son decides, no, I don't want her to be my wife, then she gets to go free without paying terms of the contract. So again, this sounds weird to us, but this first section is set up to help protect the family, right? And it seems weird to us because that's so far removed from who we are as a country and as a people, but one that's not odd in other places of the world. But here's the main point. Here, all of these things tied together, these are an expression and an application of the sixth commandment. Thou shalt not kill. The prohibition against murder is the mandate to love and protect the life of other people. And what we see here is there is a way to take someone's life without killing them. There's a way to take advantage of them and to rob them of their livelihood without actually killing them. And so this prohibition, do not kill, doesn't mean just don't take a life. It means protect life. An impoverished person who can't get out of the hole that they're in, regardless of the reason, should not be taken advantage of. That takes their life for them, away from them. And so the purpose of this indentured servanthood was to be able to give away, to help people get out of their situations without just giving them a handout. In this system, it was for the slave. Their debts could be paid, skills could be learned, life could be embettered. And for the owner, they would get the work that they would need. And so God, in his justice, says both of those need to be protected. Speaking of murder, third section regarding murder, verse 12. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but let God fall into his hand, God let him fall into his hand. Then I will appoint a place for you in which he may flee. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. Again, this is also an expression of the sixth commandment. What does it mean to murder? So you have someone who hit someone in the face, and it just happened to be a unlucky hit, and the person dies, right? Is that murder? What if it was unintentional? It was unplanned, they're just in a fight, didn't mean to kill him, but he ended up dead. What happens then? Or what if it was planned, premeditated, purposeful? What happens? Well, then it says, well, that murderer needs to be executed. And so what we're seeing right away is not all killing is murder. Executing a murderer does not break the sixth commandment. But immediately questions pop up. Like, well, what do we do in the case of it wasn't premeditated, they just got into a fight? What do we do then? He hits him, boom, he dies, he wasn't trying to kill him. It's still wrong. It's still bad. But in that case, the person's not executed. Instead, there would be cities of refuge where they could go up and they would not be avenged of that. Now, if they left those cities, then they were open up to be revenged by the family. But as long as he stays in the city, he's fine. Or what do we do in situations where, the death penalty is not murder? Are there other situations where the death penalty is needed? Yes, verse 15. Whoever strikes his father or mother shall be put to death. Verse 17. Whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. You execute a person who either curses or hits his parents. Why, though? I mean, I understand you premeditate, you want to kill someone, you kill them. Okay, that person needs to be executed. I get that. But why just a person who curses their parents? Why does that person need to be executed? Well, there's a theoretical and biblical reason and a practical one. Theoretically, the fifth commandment says, honor your father and mother. If you do, there's going to be a long life, right? There's a promise that comes with it. The way that you treat your parents is a reflection of your attitude towards God. Kids, the way that you treat your parents is a reflection of your attitude towards God. So, whoever would hit their parents is firmly against God and should not expect to live a long life. Whoever would curse their parents is cursing God and should not expect to live a long life. Now, practically, a person who's willing to curse and hit their parents will show even less restraint with other people. And so striking your parents with your words or your hands gets you the death penalty. Does that shock you? It should. It's a big deal. Verse 16, another crime that deserves a death penalty. Let's read it. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him, shall be put to death. This is another clear indication that the slavery this is talking about in the early passages of Exodus is different than the slavery that America was participated in. If you kidnap a person and sell them into slavery, the kidnapper and seller and the purchaser are executed. Israel is not to be in the business of trading people. Now, in the next few verses, we're going to go rapid fire through them. I'm not going to read them all, but it's still in the same vein of, are there times where capital punishment is required? What do those look like? Or if someone's injured, what do we do with that? So, verse 18, you have two men get into a fight. One gets injured. And in our day, we'd say he has to go to the hospital. In that day, he goes to his bed. But what happens? Two men fight, one gets injured. He's not dead, but he's injured. What do you do? Well, the man who put him in the hospital pays his expenses, right? He can't take the position of, I didn't break the sixth commandment. I didn't kill him. It's okay. God's like, no, there's no line that you cross where suddenly, well, because I killed him, I'm guilty, but if I didn't kill him, I'm fine. No. You put someone in the hospital, you pay their expenses. Verse 20. If a man hits his slave and the slave dies, the owner gets the death penalty. Verse 26 and 27, he hits the slave, busts out a tooth or busts his eye, the slave gets to go free. He doesn't have to serve out the rest of his time. Verse 22, this is fascinating. Two men get into a fight. Right, they're rumbling. And during the fight, one of them accidentally hits a pregnant woman, and it causes the woman to go into labor. What do? Well, if the woman and the child are okay, then the man who hit the woman has to pay a fine to the family, pay their expenses, pay a penalty. If the mom or the baby are injured, then the man is to be injured in the same way. So the baby comes out crippled, the man gets crippled. If the baby dies, the man dies. And all of these scenarios, as they're described, the idea that's being brought home is this: God's justice that his people are to imitate should be fair and appropriate. The punishment should fit the crime. And I encourage you to read it later, but it even gets into these scenarios like, okay, well, what if people are involved, right? What if an ox gores someone to death, right? So let's say I'm a farmer, I own an ox, that ox gets out and it gores someone to death. What do we do then? And it lays everything out there, right? Well, it depends. Did the owner have the ox corralled the right way? Did the ox have a history of goring people? And if it did, the owner is held liable. So an ox has a history of goring people, it gores someone to death, the owner is executed. But if the owner had all protections in place, well, then there's a fine, right? There are all these different things. I encourage you to read it. But what we find is God cares about his people. They should not be taken advantage of, and life should be protected. And there's a right way to go about that. Fourth section, regarding property. This is Exodus 21:33 to 22:15. I'm not going to read all of it, but it's primarily an expression of the 8th commandment, do not steal. But what do you do if someone does steal? Well, they have to pay restitution. And there's all these different scenarios and formulas to figure out what that restitution should be. And so sometimes it's 1-to-1. If they steal this, you got to pay it back. Other times it's double, triple, or 4 times, or even 5 times what the stolen item was worth. It even gets to, say I'm a farmer. It's about to be sowing season. I need help. I don't have an ox. And so, Paul lends me an ox. Okay, well, as I'm sitting here working with Paul's ox, what if something happens to it? What if it gets injured? What if it dies? What if it disappears, right? All these scenarios are laid out here so that Israel will know what to do in that situation. It's really interesting case law. But what it all shows is God cares about personal property. As Israel's starting this new nation, they're not going to have this form of communism where nobody owns anything and everybody has the right to everything. But we have to remember why. Why does God set this in place? Well, it's because of the truth that God owns everything. You don't own the things that you own. God owns them, and he gave them to you for a purpose. And we will have to give an account for what we do with the things that God has given us. And so not only does theft show a mistrust in who God is and his providence and all of that, but it's also an attack on his wisdom and prevents his plan. And so if God has given someone $1 million, and I'm mad at that, right? Because God didn't give me $1 million. Not only does me stealing from that man show a lack of trust in the providence of God and a trust in his plan, but it also actively works against his plan because now the person with $1 million can't do the things that God has told them to do with it. And so we are to show a concern for God's wisdom that he knows what he's doing and protect property. Let's keep going. Section 5, regarding purity. This one's very short. 4 examples are given. Let's read it together. We're in chapter 22, verse 16. Chapter 22, verse 16 says this: If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than Yahweh alone shall be devoted to destruction. At first, these 4 things don't seem to have anything in common. You have 2 people who aren't married, they shack up, they're sleeping together. You have a sorceress, like a witch, right? someone who would call on demonic powers or magic to do things. You have a person who commits bestiality, and you have someone who makes a sacrifice to a different god. Why are those grouped together? Well, in the first scenario, again, you have this unmarried couple sleeping together. It's consensual, but that doesn't mean it's okay. It's not allowed. And so they have to get married. And by getting married means the husband, the man, would have to pay the dowry, the bride price, to have her. And if the girl's father's like, no, that guy's a scoundrel, I don't want him to be part of the family, I'm not giving her to him, which says a lot, because in that day, if it became known that the girl was no longer a virgin, then she would be pretty much unmarriable at that point. And so in that case, the man still has to pay the dowry, even though he's not getting the wife. The next three are more severe. You have a sorceress. She's executed. A person who commits bestiality, executed. A person who sacrifices to any other god, executed. Now, what's happening in all four of these situations? Well, they're all tied to the seventh commandment, do not commit adultery. Idolatry and witchcraft throughout the Bible are equated with adultery. Why? Because God says, you're my people. You're like a bride to me. And whenever you go and consort with either demons or demonic practices, you go sacrificing to other idols, it's adultery, spiritual adultery. But in these case laws, the idea is this: the commandment against adultery is the mandate to protect purity, whether it's purity of the marriage bed or purity of the altar. Sixth section, regarding justice. This is another long one that we're not going to go line by line, but one that's in the news today. There are elements in this of the first commandment. You see that at play. The fourth commandment, the eighth commandment, the ninth commandment, the 10th commandment. All of these elements are at play here. But the call of the passage is found in the first words of it. We're in Exodus 22, verse 21, and it says this: you shall not wrong. And it goes through all these scenarios. There are four groups of people that they're told not to wrong. You have the sojourner, so the foreigner who's traveling through your area. You have the widow and the orphan. You have the poor, and then you have personal enemies. Do not wrong the sojourner. Do what's right to widows and orphans. Don't wrong the poor, and even don't wrong your enemies. And the idea is justice does not depend on the social or the financial status of the people involved. It means specifically, don't take advantage of them. If you give out a loan, don't charge interest. If there's a lawsuit or a court case, don't automatically assume that the poor person is wrong. And don't also assume that automatically the poor person is right. Equal justice in the eyes of the law. You've been fighting with your next door neighbor, right? You've become enemies, and you just can't get along. And one day you're out on the road and you see your neighbor's donkey there. That's one of the scenarios it lays out. It's your enemy, it's his donkey. You don't say, idiot, kind of shoo the donkey along even farther. No, you grab the donkey and you take it back to your neighbor. Your personal feelings towards someone or something should not influence how justice is dispersed. Not only that, but when you rightly view and obey the commandments, you find that everybody benefits. So let's look at one example. This is still within this section of do not wrong people, right? Take care of people. Don't take advantage of people. Look at verse 10 of chapter 23. It says this: for 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the seventh year you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Now at first it sounds like, wait a second, this is more like talking about the fourth commandment, honor the Sabbath, right? But this is actually in a different section of don't take advantage of people. Let's keep reading. You shall likewise do with your vineyard, your olive orchard, verse 12. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman, the alien, may be refreshed. Obeying the Sabbath is not about just you getting rest. It's about letting others have their rest as well. Your people, your animals. God's design in the law, in the Ten Commandments, is never one-dimensional. It always impacts everyone around us. And so with all of these, the idea that keeps getting hammered again and again and again is treat other people like you want to be treated. Okay, Israel, take care of sojourners. Take care of those who are coming through your country. Why? Because you were a sojourner. And what happened? You went to Egypt for help, you were there, and then they took advantage of you and made you slaves. Don't treat other sojourners the same way. Take care of those who are disadvantaged. Why? Because I took care of you when you were disadvantaged. When you were needy, I gave you what you needed. When you needed protection, I gave you protection. Do the same thing for other people, because when you do, you're reflecting me and my justice. Final section regarding worship. Now you'll notice the first section was regarding worship, and now we have the last section regarding worship. This is found in Exodus 23, verses 13 to 33. I'm not going to read it now, partially because some of it's we've discussed in earlier parts of Exodus, and some of it's going to come up again later on. But here's the overview. Verse 13 basically is the first commandment, right? Obey everything that I've said. Pay attention to everything that I've told you. Don't even let the names of other gods be on your lips. Worship me alone. And then he gets into some of the specifics of what that looks like. Here are certain festivals you're going to have. You're going to have 3 times a year. You come down to Jerusalem for worship feasts, worship festivals. Here are the sacrifices you're going to do. Here are some specific offerings. But again, these are going to come up later. But one of the things to latch on here that is so important is God's desire for his people is to have their lives have this rhythm, this syncopated pattern of worship. There are daily things you do in worship. There are weekly things you do in worship. There are monthly things and yearly things that you do. Your life is to be set up to where the worship of God is woven into every fabric of it, even down to the calendar. We would have these regular reminders that set our hearts on God. Now, that's a whole lot of passage that we just flew over. And we kind of skipped over it like a pebble that was thrown. But I hope you can sense God's heart beating in these passages. Israel is becoming a nation in every sense of the word, and the people as a nation are to reflect the heart and the character of God in their dealings with each other. Things like purity and justice and righteousness, a genuine concern for one another. But there's one question that still remains. What does this have to do with us? Should we hang the 10 Commandments up in our courtroom? Should we draft all this case law in Exodus 20 to 23? Should we draft that into our law as a nation? What does it mean for us? And the answer is nothing. We're not the nation of Israel. We're not under the Sinai covenant. We never were. But if that's the case, why did I just spend all that time going through all of these individual things? Why are we even going through the book of Exodus at all? Should we just crumble it up, throw it away? No, because even though we may not be under the legal or moral authority of Exodus 20 to 23, it's still massively important for us. We are in the unique position as the church of Jesus Christ. So if you're a believer, you're part of the church, you're part of the people of God, we're in a unique position where the Old Testament law is not binding on us, but it means everything to us because the heart of God that is on display in these laws is still the heart of God today. It hasn't changed. God still cares about life, and it must be protected. Even the life of a pregnant woman who just accidentally gets caught up in a skirmish. Life of the baby still matters to God. God still cares about justice. In fact, God hates injustice. And so when anything in any legal system that automatically assumes, well, the poor person is guilty, or automatically assumes the poor person is right, that is unjust, and God hates it. And so we don't have to point to, well, Exodus 22 says that this is the reason why this is wrong. No, instead what we do is we say, we see in Exodus 22 the heart of God, that he hates injustice, and he still hates injustice today. God cares about life, and it must be protected. God cares about justice, both on a national scale and in a personal level. So you see your neighbor and they've, the enemy that you're fighting with, your neighbor that you're fighting with, and you see something that's gotten out, you see their dog has gotten out, go help them get their dog, even though you're their enemy, right? Why? Because it shows the heart and the love of God. Now, how do we take these and apply them into specific instances in our country? I've already mentioned things like, immigration is in the news. How does that impact what's going on with the sojourner here in Exodus 23? Taking the life of babies, right? How does that fit into the protection of life? What does it look like to help poor people who can't get out of the situation that they're in? How do we take these things and apply it to our situation today? And the answer is, I don't know. But I do know this, that the believer, the person who's put their faith in Jesus Christ, the person who's met the living God, has been born again by faith alone in Christ, and whose purpose in their life is to know God and to make him known, to magnify him and glorify him with everything they do. That person will approach these issues with a gospel humility and wisdom that the rest of the world doesn't have. When we approach politics and we approach questions of ethics, we don't come at it blindly like other people do. We have the heart of God on display in the Bible. And so what we need to do is apply ourselves to knowing him, and then we will have the wisdom needed to apply it to specific situations. And so what do we need to do? We need to press ourselves into knowing God more, into loving God more, and to, with his help and by his Holy Spirit, making him known. Let's pray. Father God, we need wisdom. We thank you for Christ. We thank you that we're no longer under the law. We thank you that we are under grace, but help us know that we still have your law written into our hearts because it's your heart. And so help us know how to be a sacrificial, loving people. Help us live our lives with justice. Help us live our lives with mercy, and help us walk humbly with you. We need wisdom to know how to talk to our neighbor and our coworkers, and we need wisdom in figuring out what to do with the legal system and what's going to please you most. And I pray that that would be the question. I pray that you would keep us from using the Bible to simply confirm our own desires, but instead you would use your word to shape our desires and then have that go out and give us wisdom in applying all of these things. We want to please you, and I pray that you help us do it by the Spirit in the name of Christ. We ask it in that name. Amen.